Live from New Delhi, you're watching DD India, India's voice to the world. I'm Mark Lynn. Coming up in the next hour, Russia's Luna-25 spacecraft crashes into the moon. The unmanned craft was due to make a soft landing on the moon's south pole. The United States has urged China to stop pressuring Taiwan and engage in meaningful dialogue. Japan's Prime Minister visits the Fukushima nuclear plant. No announcement yet on a date for the treated radioactive water to be released. And England takes on Spain in the Women's World Cup final in Sydney. Russia's first moon mission in 47 years has failed after its Luna-25 spacecraft spun out of control and smashed into the lunar surface. Russia's state space corporation Roscosmos said it had lost contact with the craft shortly after a problem occurred as the craft was shunted into pre-landing orbit on Saturday. Moscow was the first to launch a satellite into orbit, that's Sputnik 1, in 1957. And Soviet cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin became the first man to travel into space in 1961. Russia has not attempted a moon mission since Luna-24 in 1976. Luna-25 was supposed to execute a soft landing on the south pole of the moon on August 21. Russia has been racing against India, whose Chandrayaan-3 spacecraft is scheduled to land on the moon's south pole this week, and more broadly against China and the United States, which both have advanced lunar ambitions. And we are joined by Dr. Ajay Lele, space scientist. Thanks, Dr. Lele, for being with us. What could have gone wrong with the Luna-25?
As far as the information which is received by various reporters, it appears that Russia was trying to do a pre-landing orbit, and that particular maneuver had failed. There are some indications that the signal which was sent for conduct of this pre-landing orbit actually had failed to ignite the craft and undertake the pre-landing orbit. Normally what happens is that if one can compare with Chandrayaan-3 mission, the craft usually reaches a particular altitude over the moon's surface in a horizontal fashion. And then you have to change the orbit also. That means you have to reduce the height of the craft also. At the same time, from horizontal position, you have to change the craft to a vertical position also.
Right.
It probably appears that something has gone wrong while conducting these types of activities and allowing the craft to face the surface of the moon in a correct orbit and a correct direction.
So, Dr. Lele, how difficult is it then to land on the south pole of the moon? Are there some unknowns in this particular place?
You see, as such, landing on a moon, at the end of the day, let's accept the fact that we are dealing with rocket science. Landing on the moon as such is a difficult proposal. India did a very successful Chandrayaan-2 mission, but at the fag end of the mission, we faced difficulties. After Indian mission, which had got spaceborne during 2019, we had in recent times 2 missions. Both were by the private players. One was from Japan and other player was from Israel. Both of them also were trying to attempt the soft landing. Both the crafts had entered into a moon's orbit in a perfect fashion. They proceeded towards conduct of a soft landing, but at the fag end of the mission, something went wrong and both the crafts had fallen down by doing a hard landing and broken on the surface of the moon. So there are a lot of things which one has to take care of while landing. Whether it is on a North Pole or a South Pole, the challenges are almost the same. Particularly when we are talking of a South Pole, more than the landing part of it, it is actually what you want to do on the surface of the South Pole. The South Pole is a surface which has got a lot of craters also. So to find an exact and a good landing spot at times becomes difficult. That's the reason the orbiter which is there since 2019, taking a lot of pictures of the moon surface, is already working for quite some time to identify the correct landing spot. Because most of the area over South Pole is actually a very rocky area. There are possibilities of the craft falling into a crater if you are not approaching the landing spot in a correct fashion. So there are basically geography-related problems for the South Pole as far as the landing sequence is concerned. And one has to follow the sequence in a particular fashion,
Right.
particularly exactly reducing the speed of the craft and various other activities.
So what happens then when mission control loses, contact with a satellite, or I mean, with a spacecraft that's about to land? This is what happened here, and they try to look for it after that. Is it possible to even find such a thing after you lose contact?
You see, immediately, particularly from your own mission point of view, it's very difficult to identify immediately what has gone wrong. Because most of the missions are at a level of a full autonomy when they reach to a particular distance over the moon surface. So there is very little one can do from the surface of the Earth, like sending signals and all that.
Yes.
Particularly as you approach towards the moon surface in more than 2 to 3 days in advance, the craft is fully autonomous. That means the craft is going to decide based on the software which is available in the craft to take particular decisions. You can take multiple decisions based on the strength of your software. And that is the reason Israel has been saying that we had a basic software glitch during the Chandrayaan 2 mission. The glitch is of the nature that we encountered certain kind of difficulties. The software was not capable enough to address those types of difficulties. There was no other option for the craft since it was not receiving a correct signal to
Right.
do a hard landing. But this time, ISRO has taken all sorts of precautions and particularly made the algorithm more stronger.
Also, what about is weight an issue? I mean, this particular it had a payload of what, 1,750 kilograms. Is that could that also be an issue?
You see, all these things are very fine things which will make a difference at the last moment. It will be very difficult to predict exactly was weight an issue because there have been occasions when more weighty substances have been landed on the moon surface. If you trace back the history, in fact, Russia itself was the first country, rather the Soviet Union, during 1970 to do a robotic landing on the moon surface. The soft landing was done for the first time in the history by Soviets only. Subsequently, if you see Apollo 15, 16, and 17 missions, the new technology was too mature at that point in time, and that the astronauts had gone to the moon surface, people of the moon buggy with them. And it was a robot unit with which they were going and generally moving around the moon surface, collecting a lot amount of information, picking up some new one can say rocks and other things on the moon surface. So the technology is matured. You can have rovers with 210 kg of the weight and all that. I
Sure.
think this may become an issue, but it's not be necessarily a very important factor. I think what is more important is to do a correct firing of your motors at the correct point in time, achieve the correct orbit, and
Okay.
start reducing the speed in a very cooperative fashion and to undertake a soft landing.
So let me ask a question that comes to everyone's mind. These successes took place in the 1970s and earlier than that. There were manned missions also in 1969 onwards. Soft landings did take place. Technology has obviously improved. Is it easier now to do these things, one would ask? That's a normal question, isn't it? Than it was then back then. Yeah, go ahead, sir.
I can fully understand. It's a very valid question. It even triggers minds of many people now also. That in those days we were able to undertake a manned mission in a very successful fashion. And it's not only a single manned mission. There have been 12 human beings who have landed on the moon surface, generally jumped around, have got back to the surface of the Earth also. But subsequently, there was a major lull as far as moon missions are concerned. You think 1969 mission, the Armstrong putting his foot on the moon surface was more about geopolitics than science. But subsequently, since there was no scientific agenda and also the missions were becoming very costly, hence NASA stopped doing those missions. So probably down the line for 4 to 5 decades, the technology remained into the closed doors and nothing much improvement was happening. That's why today we are again almost starting from scratch and reinventing the wheel, if I'm using a correct word, and again trying to go to the moon. So it's going to be problematic. People are learning from their own mistakes, but there are good success stories also. You look at China's moon program, a very good success story. Their Chang'e 3 and Chang'e 4 have put rover and a lander system on the surface of the moon. The rover of the Chandrayaan 4 is, after 4 years also, is fully functional even today. So people have invested into technologies, they have learned from the mistakes of the past. But at the same time, I will say that after the Apollo program was shut, there was a pretty good amount of a lull because the geopolitics of technology, which was at a headstrong way during Cold War, was no longer there subsequently.
How much of a setback is this to the Russian space program?
I think it would be a major setback because if you see, the earlier mission was not taken by Russia. The Luna-25 mission was taken by Soviet Union. So in a technical sense, one can say that this was the first mission for Russia as far as moon is concerned. Definitely, Russia is facing some amount of problems with their space architecture, not today, only for a couple of years now. If you recollect, in the year 2015, India's Chandrayaan 2 was supposed to go towards the moon as a joint mission between India and Russia. However, the Russians were not able to give us the rover and a lander system as promised earlier. Hence, the mission got delayed. ISRO scientists took on themselves and they developed a rover and a landing system. The mission also got delayed. So, I understand that Russian space program is facing a lot of problems, particularly after the end of the Cold War. There are two reasons which have been given by the experts in this field. One is that the financial conditions, and other is that Russia has not, the Soviet Union and Russia now has not worked on ensuring that the scientific development continues and the rocket scientists are given good amount of encouragement to continue working over there. So they say that the Soviet time astronauts, Soviet time scientists are no longer there. Russia again has to look at the science in a very fresh way, unfortunately, because they are not continuing passing on the knowledge, continue developing the scientific speed in their country, particularly in the aerospace area after the disintegration of Soviet Union.
Well, reports suggest that the Luna-26 is also planned in the next 3 years, and there are other 2 more missions that Russia has. So these will continue as, to be on track despite this, one would think, isn't it?
I think let's understand one fact, that having failures in the domain of a space is not a very uncommon thing. Everybody has gone through this cycle of the failures. So I'm sure that Russia is not going to get bogged down just because they have got a failure over here. They also have got a long-term lunar agenda. You see, every country in the world who is looking at moon is not having a very short-term agenda of just visiting the moon once. That's why if you see India's program also, we started way back in 2005. We had put our craft on the surface of the moon in 2008. And subsequently, our journey towards moon has started. So these missions are long-term missions. They should not be seen as a successful failure based on only single isolated mission. So I'm sure that Russia will definitely put up efforts and try to do the other missions successfully.
We leave it there. Thank you very much, Dr. Ajay Lele, space scientist, for joining us and enlightening us on this subject. Still to come on DD India News Hour, Taiwan says 25 Chinese Air Force planes crossed the Taiwan Straits median line. Niger's coup leader proposes a 3-year transition to civilian rule after meeting West African leaders. watching DD India News Hour. I'm Mark Lynn. The second and final deboosting operation of India's moon mission Chandrayaan-3 was successfully completed on Sunday morning. Scientists at India's space agency ISRO closely monitored this critical phase ahead of the spacecraft's landing on the lunar surface. The space agency says the lander Vikram will try a soft landing on the unexplored South Polar region of the moon on Wednesday. A successful moon landing will be historic for India, making it the fourth country to have achieved this feat. Chandrayaan-3 was launched into space from the Satish Dhawan Space Center in the southern Indian city of Sriharikota on July 14. And our correspondent Jai Singh is joining us from Chennai with an update on this story. Well, Jai Singh, we are speaking, of course, in the context at a time when Russia's spacecraft has had a hard landing on the moon. What is different with Chandrayaan-3?
Well, Chandrayaan-3 has taken a circuitous route to reach the orbit around the moon, whereas Luna-25 had an almost straight path towards the moon. We are having several maneuvers before reducing the orbit to what the Chandrayaan-3's lander is there at an orbit of 25 kilometers at its nearest point and 134 kilometers at its furthest point, which is an oval-shaped orbit. Whereas in Luna-25's case, it was sidestepping several phases because its configuration is a little bit different. The strike rate in any lunar mission is not anywhere close to 50%. It is less than 50%. So Luna-25 has met with the fate something similar to Chandrayaan-2. But in the case of Chandrayaan-3, the scientists are very hopeful of having a soft landing because it has the scientific community of ISRO has learned the various experiences from Chandrayaan-2. Therefore, the lander legs have been reinforced, strengthened further. It has been designed in such a way that it can withstand up to 3 meters per second while landing, though the intended speed is just 2 meters per second at the time of landing. Another thing is the number of debooster motors that are fitted on the legs of the Chandrayaan-3 lander called Vikram. Earlier there were 5, now it is 4 with added tooth in it. Another thing is the enhanced area of the possible place of landing. Earlier it was 500 meter by 500 meter, a square surface. Now it has been expanded to 4 kilometers by 2.4 kilometer, a bigger place, and it has a velocimeter that can move the lander a bit away from the place which is originally intended in case there is any hurdle. So several safety mechanisms have been incorporated, and the navigation system has been updated with the latest software. Therefore, the scientific community in ISRO is very hopeful of having its rendezvous with the lunar surface close to the moon, a very successful one, to take India to the select league of nations, and also to be the first among the nations to have a soft landing anywhere closer to the South Pole.
So indeed, the date is Wednesday. Is there anything specific about that, the choice of Wednesday? Jai Singh, can you hear me? I think we've lost our audio link with Jai Singh. Hopefully, we'll try and restore that. In the meantime, let's move on with this story. The coup leader in Niger has proposed a 3-year transition to civilian rule after meeting a delegation of West African leaders. Abdurrahmane Tiani warned that any attack on the country would not be a walk in the park for those involved. Speaking on national television on Saturday, He gave few details on the planned transition of power, only saying the principles for the move would be decided within 30 days at a meeting to be hosted by the ruling military council.
In this context, the leaving forces who will be invited to attend will set about formulating within 30 days concerts proposals designed to 1. Define the fundamental principles that should govern our transition. 2. Define the priority of the transition, which should last no longer than 3 years. 3. Define national priorities during the transition. And 4. To call for fundamental values to guide the rebuilding of the republic.
The junta leader also said that nobody in the country wants to see conflict.
Nigerians, my dear compatriots, I hereby reaffirm that our ambition is not to seize power. I also reaffirm our readiness to engage in any dialogue, as long as it takes into account the orientation desired by the proud and resilient people of Niger. Any coercive and ignorant approach to the quest for sovereignty, security, and good governance, clearly expressed by the population, amount to ignoring the deep-rooted dynamics at work in Sahelian's country, abandoned to their own fate for over 10 years by the very people who, instead of helping them fight the evil that beats them, now want to attack them today.
And let's return now to Jai Singh, our correspondent who is in Chennai and talking to us about Chandrayaan 3. So we had a bit of a link-up problem with you, Jai Singh. Tell us, about the date, 23rd of August.
Sorry,
yeah, why is 23rd of August important?
Well, 23rd is a very auspicious occasion for scientific reasons. The reason is that on 23rd August only, the sun rises on the surface of the moon. Sunrise is important because the lander and the rover that is currently within the lander, both have scientific payloads that will operate only when it gets supply of electricity. And supply of electricity is through, solar panels that are deployed in it. So solar panels will generate electricity only when there is sunlight. Therefore, 23rd is the day on which there will be sunrise. Once the sun rises, there will be continuous 14 earth days of sunshine there. The next 14 days will be total darkness on the surface, intended surface, where Chandrayaan 3 is supposed to land. Therefore, 23rd is very important in the sojourn. The embarking of journey has the D-Day on 23rd of this month.
So coming back to the deboosting operation that took place today, it's the final deboosting operation. So what is the current orbit of the Chandrayaan 3?
Well, Chandrayaan 3 has been brought to another oval-shaped orbit, which is much closer to the moon. Now the lowest distance from the surface of the moon is 25 kilometers, and the highest orbital point, that means the perihelion, is apoleon, is at 134 kilometers. So on 23rd of August, from this 25 kilometers distance only, the lander will be brought to a powered descent mode. Now the deorbiting that phase is over. Now on 23rd, it will be brought down towards the surface of the moon in a soft manner from this 25-kilometer distance only. That again has several phases. Initially, it will be brought down from 6,000 kilometers per hour to 2,000 kilometers per hour. At the time of simultaneously bringing the distance much closer and closer, and then reorienting the lander. Now it is at horizontal orientation. it is not seeing, the legs are not seeing the surface of the moon.
Okay.
On 23rd, when the distance is further and further
Yes.
lowered, it will be brought just at a position when the lander's legs
Yes.
are exactly looking at the surface of the moon.
Okay.
And then the sensors will
Right.
see the path which has already been loaded into the computer system. The system, the software of the lander,
Yes, Jai Singh.
it will be cross-checking whether the path is correct or not, and any course correction it will take on
Yes.
its own, because there are state-of-the-art equipment to do that. And
Right.
if there are any hurdle also, that will also be sensed by the lander and go to a safest place
Jai
where
Singh.
the landing will be really a successful one.
We leave
So
it there.
this is
Thank you
the
very
mode of
much, Jai Singh, for
operations.
your
This is
detailed description of all that has been happening and is going on currently with Chandrayaan-3. We're moving on then. Washington has urged Beijing to stop putting pressure on Taiwan after Chinese naval ships and warplanes carried out exercises around the island. Taiwan said dozens of Chinese aircraft entered its airspace on Saturday. Beijing said that the war games were a stern warning after Taiwan's vice president briefly visited the United States on his way to and from a visit to Paraguay. Those exercises were in response to Taiwan's Vice President William Lai visiting the United States. In a statement, the U.S. State Department urged Beijing to cease its military, diplomatic and economic pressure against Taiwan and instead engage in meaningful dialogue with the island. The U.S. said that it would continue to monitor the exercises closely. Taiwan's defense ministry says there have been multiple Chinese air incursions in the past 24 hours. Officials in Taipei reported that 25 Chinese planes have crossed the Taiwan Straits median line. However, Beijing officials say the joint naval and air drills are part of combat readiness patrols around the island. In response, Taiwan on Sunday conducted combat air patrols from 2 of its bases. And here's Andrew Wood's take on the subject from Hong Kong.
Well, these exercises were quite big, and dozens of planes crossed the median line that separates Taiwanese airspace and mainland airspace in the middle of the Taiwan Strait. So Beijing is certainly sending a message, a rather frequent message, that Taiwan should not, it thinks, act in this way, that namely politicians like William Lai should not visit America. Beijing is very upset with the way that, well, any time that American politicians visit Taiwan or Taiwanese politicians visit America, because that looks like they're giving credibility to the idea that Taiwan is an independent sovereign state, and Beijing, of course, says it's not, that it's part of its own territory, and will be reunited with the mainland one day by force if necessary. There could be a message here about the presidential elections next year. At the moment, William Lai, who made those stopovers in America, he's vice president. It looks as though, if the polls are right, he stands a very good chance to be president. Beijing thinks that he's a separatist, that he's going to work towards more of an independent Taiwan, turning its back on Beijing. But Beijing has to be careful here, because it doesn't want its protests, it doesn't want its belligerent stance to backfire and, in fact, frighten Taiwanese into voting for Mr. Lai. The Taiwan foreign minister said that it's up to the people of Taiwan to decide their fate and not the bully next door. Andrew Wood in Hong Kong, reporting for DD India.
The Indonesian health minister visited a Jan Aushadhi Kendra, that's a public medicine kendra or a place where this happened in the western state of Gujarat today. Meeting with the Indian Health Minister, Dr. Mansukh Mandavia, on the sidelines of the G20 Health Ministers meeting. The Health Minister of Indonesia, Mr. Budi Gunadi Sadikin, said that India's medicine model is the best in the world.
I want to give medicine to our people with the best access, so easy to access, best quality, and also best price. I've looked around many countries. And I'm convinced that India has the best. And I bring my government officials, but also the businessmen to talk, public to public and private to private, and then to replicate.
Still to come on DD India News Hour. People living on the coasts in southern California, they are preparing for Hurricane Hillary. And thousands of Israelis protest once again in Tel Aviv against Netanyahu's proposed judicial overhaul.
Welcome to Jaipur.
You're watching DD India News Hour. I'm Mark Lin. Russia's Luna-25 spacecraft crashes into the moon after it spun into an uncontrolled orbit. The United States has urged China to stop pressuring Taiwan and engage in meaningful dialogue. It's England versus Spain in the 2023 Women's World Cup final. Tens of thousands of Israelis have protested again in Tel Aviv against the government's coalition, that is, the proposed judicial overhaul, that is. And the move, in fact, what does it do? It significantly curtails the powers of the highest court. Supporters of the legislation argue that it reinstates balance to the branches of power, while critics say that it removes checks and balances. The first of several appeals was heard by Israel's Supreme Court earlier this week. One of the protesters shared his concern over the reform, which has set off 33 straight weeks of demonstrations.
I don't know if the reform should pass like it's presented. I have my concerns. I know that many people who are here were in favor of the reform for years. But there's got to be a friendly, like brothers, compromise in the Knesset. I wish there was a better leadership on both sides that can bring us together, that everybody is in favor of, that brings peace to the table, not conflict and division.
The United States Coastal Communications in Southern California are preparing for Hillary, that's a hurricane. And the National Hurricane Center has predicted that it will lose more strength and turn into a tropical storm as it heads towards Southern California on Sunday. In its latest advisory, potentially catastrophic flash flooding is expected, especially in the northern portions of the peninsula. Rainfall of 3 to 6 inches is expected across portions of Southern California and southern Nevada as well. People in the hurricane's path are hoping for the best and preparing for the worst.
There will be power outages, make no mistake. There will be power outages across Southern California, and we want to be sure that we have this close communication with those utility companies to ensure that they can restore power as quickly as they possibly can.
Japan's Prime Minister Fumio Kishida visited the facility where water from the Fukushima plant was being treated to remove radioactive elements. Kishida also visited a lookout point near the location where advanced liquefied processing system ALPS treated water would be released into the Pacific Ocean. Japan says that it will remove most radioactive elements from the water except for tritium, a hydrogen isotope that must be diluted because it is difficult to filter out. Speaking to representatives of the plant operated by Tokyo Electric Power Company, Kishida emphasized the long-term nature of the plant's decommissioning process.
Concerning the timing of the release into the sea, the full cabinet will make a decision based on the status of safety works and countermeasures against rumors, and I will refrain from giving a specific timing at this point.
India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi will be in South Africa to attend the BRICS summit this week. The BRICS group of developing economies, Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa, will discuss the expansion of the bloc and a common currency. Our correspondent Leon Sisiange is in Johannesburg with the report.
Host President Cyril Ramaphosa will be joined by leaders including India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Lula Inácio da Silva of Brazil, as well as China's Xi Jinping, for the three-day summit here in Johannesburg. Russia's President Vladimir Putin will not attend physically because of an arrest warrant issued by the International Criminal Court for war crimes in Ukraine. The Russian leader will, however, follow proceedings via video link. Some of the topical issues at the summit will be the expansion of the bloc. There has been interest from as many as 40 nations. Now, earlier we spoke to Deputy Secretary General of South Africa's ruling party, the ANC, Nomvula Mokonyane, about the interest from other nations. And here is what she had to say.
It actually shows that there are thousands and thousands of people of the world who do embrace the vision of BRICS. There are many parties and governments who embrace the vision of BRICS. And out of that, it actually shows not only the greatness of BRICS, but also the affirmation of what we believe.
Iran, Argentina, the United Arab Emirates, and also Saudi Arabia are looking to join. South African authorities emphasize that the current geopolitical context has driven renewed interest as countries of the global south look for alternatives in a multipolar world. The subject of de-dollarization will be on the table for discussion as the bloc seeks a strategic economic expansion. Leon Senyange in Johannesburg, reporting for DD India.
Leaders from Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa are seeking to develop trade and economic cooperation across the bloc. The BRICS bloc of emerging world economies is holding its 15th summit in Johannesburg, South Africa, from August 22nd to 24th. Here's a report on the key issues of the year.
This is the first time BRICS leaders are gathering since the COVID-19 pandemic hit. But the summit will be marked by the absence of Russian President Vladimir Putin, who is participating remotely. The summit is expected to cover a wide range of issues. One of the key topics is the expansion of the group, as 40 countries have shown interest.
Them coming to the table with us will only strengthen the South-to-South cooperation that we need for a sustainable future. So I'm absolutely delighted that the countries have come knocking at the BRICS doors rather than us having to go to them.
BRICS members will also discuss cross-border trade in local currencies to reduce dependency on the US dollar. Altogether, the 5 member nations account for more than 40% of the world's population, and their combined GDP is more than 26% of the global economy.
The BRICS mechanism has the potential to become a crucial organization in determining global development. Its potential lies not only in the economy, but also in the various initiatives it promotes. In my view, the BRICS countries are ready to set a reform agenda for the current global economic order.
Promoting settlement in local currencies is a big issue that will be discussed during the summit. BRICS has emphasized financial cooperation since its establishment and has promoted the reform of the World Bank and IMF, as well as establishing the new development bank. BRICS opposes the hegemony of the US dollar and pursues the reform of the global financial system.
Experts say the summit is a major opportunity for BRICS leaders to counter Western dominance around the world. Bureau Report, DD India.
Shubhendu Ghosh now joins us from Johannesburg with an update. Well, Shubhendu, looking at it from India's point of view, what are India's priorities at BRICS?
Right, Mark. Good afternoon from Johannesburg, South Africa. Looking at the priorities of India and also the BRICS grouping as a whole, there are some priorities that have continued since the inception of the BRICS grouping. It is about keeping forth the needs, the requirements, the aspirations of the developing world in the foreground. These BRICS countries represent the leading emerging economies in the world, and their concerns, the concerns of Global South, are going to find the platform. But this is what has happened over the years in the BRICS Summit. In this edition, as we've also been presenting in our stories, a particular attention is also on the manner in which expansion of this grouping could take place. From 5-nation grouping of BRICS nation, could more developing emerging economies be a part of it? Deliberations will focus on that. The second important aspect is going to be if a common currency, consider the manner in which euro works in Europe and sort of works across nations, can a common currency like that could be evolved for the BRICS nations as well, which is going to be a currency for transaction between developing and emerging economies. Now, both these agenda items cannot be concluded or achieved in a short period of time. But deliberations, talks will continue in a forward-looking direction. All countries are on board in principle as far as the vision is concerned. But how will these really be implemented, whether we talk about taking in new members or having a common currency, because a lot of protocols, issues in respective countries would come into play. And therefore, the discussions would focus on that. But it's turning into a reality will take some more time.
Indeed, you talked about expansion, and obviously it's BRICS plus Africa this time, and BRICS plus in general. Is the name of BRICS going to change over time?
That's an interesting question, really, and perhaps the BRICS leaders would say that let's cross the bridge when we reach it. But for now, yes, you mentioned about BRICS and Africa. The theme this year is talking about closer cooperation between BRICS and Africa. South Africa is the host, but we're talking about Africa as a region, as a continent as a whole, the manner in which there is a greater potential for engagement with the BRICS nations that are emerging economies and the economies that are based in Africa. The manner in which India, for example, also has traditionally and also in the recent years engaged with Africa as far as development partnership is concerned. There are several human resource development training programs that India has instituted as a part of its bilateral engagement with countries in Africa. But with BRICS also putting Africa, the larger continent, in picture, the engagement is going to be more comprehensive and its impact going to be more diverse in the days to come.
Shubhendu Ghosh, thanks very much. Still to come on DD India News Hour. England face Spain in the Women's World Cup final. Inter Miami beat Nashville SC in a thrilling Leagues Cup final.
Welcome to Kumarakom, Kerala, God's own country.
You're watching DD India, and still sticking with our story on BRICS, the BRICS summit in Johannesburg. Our correspondent Shubhendu Ghosh, whom we just spoke to a little while earlier, has caught up with India's Sherpa at BRICS, Damu Ravi. And during the summit, a bilateral meeting between the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the Chinese President Xi Jinping is expected.
Johannesburg in South Africa is all set to host the 15th BRICS summit. I have with me Mr. Damu Ravi, India's BRICS Sherpa. Welcome to DD India, sir.
Thank
you. This is the first in-person leader summit after the pandemic. How does that raise the expectations, and what is new in this edition of BRICS Summit?
Well, first of all, good morning, and all the leaders to meet in person in this important event. South African leadership, particularly the President, has done enormous work to bring together.
Right, and sir, if you could take us through India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi's priorities in this edition of the BRICS Summit.
Yeah, I think Honorable Prime Minister Narendra Modi has given a strong pitch for the development and the development dimension of the global discourse today. I think it dates back to the time when January earlier this year he hosted the Global South Summit, in which about 125 countries' leaders have participated. I think taking off from there, the deliberations within India's presidency of the G20 and the BRICS, there is a synergy developing, particularly the narrative on development coming from the developing countries' perspective, from the global south, and how we need to develop that perspective and put it in the right way of understanding the women-led development, the food security, bringing in millets into the context, and the lifestyle for environment when you talk about climate change and energy. These are the important dimensions that are being discussed, and thankfully, there is a lot of synergy within the BRICS discussions. So all of this are going to be captured in the Johannesburg Declaration that will come out at the end of the BRICS Summit.
Right. So as we understand, BRICS is a grouping of the leading emerging developing economies. From that economic context, what are the issues in focus? What can we expect in this edition of the BRICS Summit?
I think it's been built over a period of time. BRICS constitutes about more than 40% of the world population, 31% of the world GDP, and 16% of the world trade. But it's still a very small segment. I think the focus here today is to do projects in the developing world using the new development bank resources and the technologies and the innovation that is happening in the BRICS countries. That's been very well brought out in the roadmap for economic cooperation among the BRICS countries. So eventually, gradually, these programs are being implemented in the BRICS countries, and Africa becomes a very priority country for all of us.
Right, and sir, in the run-up to the BRICS Summit, we've been hearing about a possible expansion of the BRICS, if there could be perhaps a common currency that could come up. If you could shed some light as to what is really happening in these deliberations.
See, the BRICS expansion started off a year ago as a preliminary thought. There is a feeling that in the changing world of the 21st century, there's a need for BRICS to expand and bring in emerging economies also into its fold. There are aspirational countries which want to come into this fold. Already about 22 countries have lined up to become members. Formally, they have conveyed their interest. And there are many more who are wanting to become members of the BRICS. But I think there is the leadership of the BRICS countries feel that the expansion will be naturally happening.
Right, so Johannesburg is hosting the BRICS Summit in South Africa. You mentioned about the significance of Africa. The theme of BRICS Summit this year also talks about BRICS and Africa. How will this engagement play out?
Well, I think in Africa becomes a focus because of the South Africa holding the presidency, and a lot of leadership having come. But if you understand, how the world is looking at Africa, particularly the BRICS countries, they have prioritized Africa, like India has been always prioritizing Africa in its foreign policy. Look at our own support to African countries in terms of infrastructure under the lines of credit. Massive projects have been taken place. So we have spent already $12.5 billion of worth of projects in this part of the world. We are very active in the capacity building. Out of the 500,000 experts that have been trained under ITEC program, half of them actually belong to Africa. So that way our reach and commitment to Africa has always been very high and is enduring. I think we have to go beyond this. We have to look at creating institutions, skill development, and bringing in the Prime Minister's visionary programs like, the Aadhaar, Skill India into Africa, the institution setting into Africa, the fintech solutions, the UPI, those solutions are low-cost solutions, which will be highly useful for African countries to do partnership with India. So it's a win-win situation for both sides at the end of the day.
Right, and so finally, Prime Minister Narendra Modi speaks about the priorities of the Global South in every international platform. How will the BRICS Summit also form a very, very important place to engage with those ideas for him?
Yes, I think some of the low-cost solutions that India has successfully introduced can be brought into the Global South. I think one of which we've already discussed about the digital platform, the digital public goods is a very important enabler for development. And the second most important is the currency being discussed in the BRICS context right now. So again, Prime Minister has emphasized a lot on the doing trading in INR, so national currencies. So that's become now a priority item in the BRICS groups. And there'll be a more concrete action plan in the days ahead as to how to introduce it. So the Global South and the BRICS fits in very well. And also we need to think that what are the success of the BRICS under the South Africa chairship will have its own positive impact into the India's G20 presidency. So because you have to understand all the BRICS countries are also members of the G20. Yes. So we can create that kind of a close understanding on the Global South issues and challenges.
Thank you very much for speaking with DD India. That was India's BRIC Sherpa Damu Ravi talking about the key themes in this edition of the BRIC Summit and India's priority at this global engagement. With camera person Ankit Rawat, Shubhendu Ghosh in Johannesburg for DD India.
You're watching DD India News Hour. Time now for the sports news. The final match of the Women's FIFA World Cup is underway between England and Spain in Sydney. Spain have taken a 1-0 lead in the 29th minute of the match. La Roja, they've got on the board with a firm strike from Olga Carmona from the left wing that beat the English goalkeeper Mary Earps. Carmona, a left back, has scored in back-to-back World Cup games for Spain. And joining us now with an update on this story is DD India correspondent Stuart Smith from London. Well, it's 67 minutes into the game, Stuart, and England still looking for the equaliser.
Yeah, they're trying hard, and certainly they've got the support of this pub in South London, but judging by the metrics and the usual stats, the number of shots on target, the amount of possession, the number of fouls, it's not looking good for England. There's still time to come back, of course, another 30 minutes at least if England doesn't equalise before then. But if you are betting, it's less than 10% chance of England winning at this point. But don't tell anyone in there. They're still very hopeful, although very nervous at the same time. And you can hear the reaction of the crowd out here is almost as good an indication as watching the game itself, with the clapping and support for when England are making shots on target, and similarly massive frustration being expressed when it's the opposite. So for now though, 30 minutes to go, everyone here having a good time, if a little worried about the outcome of this game.
Indeed, but just tell us a little bit about what this World Cup has done for women's football itself, the popularity across Britain as well as across the world.
Yeah, we've seen it frequently here in England that when a women's team plays at the national level, and especially when it does well, as the Lionesses have been over the past year and a half, then that does translate into extra interest, into extra support, and even viewing figures get that as well. It's a cycle which seems to be on the up. FIFA and the FA here in England are excited about that these games are bringing more women to the sport, and indeed the Prime Minister here in the UK, Rishi Sunak, has been commenting on that. He's been saying that his daughters have been inspired, and he hopes other girls in the country are as well. So even if it isn't a win, the Prime Minister is suggesting that it will be a win for women's football more generally, with even more interest expected.
Stuart Smith, thanks very much for being with us. Messi continued his brilliant run of form for Inter Miami as he scored yet another goal to guide his side to the League's Cup title. Inter Miami defeated Nashville on penalties after the match ended 1-1 in regulation time. Messi scored an impressive goal in the 24th minute of the match and later converted his penalty in the shootout. This was the 10th goal for Messi in 7 matches. He received the ball just outside the penalty box and unleashed a brilliant shot which flew into the top corner. The 7-time Ballon d'Or winner was named player of the tournament, which includes teams from MLS and Liga MX. A packed stadium welcomed Brazil's forward Neymar Jr. to Al Hilal. On Saturday, fans roared as the Brazilian great entered the stadium to lights, music and pyrotechnics in a warm reception to their new star player. After being introduced to fans, Neymar watched from the stands as his new club Al Hilal drew 1-1 at home against Al Fayha. Neymar signed a 2-year contract with the Riyadh-based club after spending 6 years with Paris Saint-Germain. India will be up against Ireland in the second T20 International at Malahide in Dublin today. India won the first match of the series by Duckworth-Lewis, and Jasprit Bumrah's comeback was the main talking point in the rain-hit opening T20. But now the focus quickly shifts to the batters from the two sides. For Ireland, it was the lower order that helped them to a modest 139 in the first T20. The top 6, which scored just 64 runs between them. And the average first innings score in T20 internationals at Malahide is 161. Teams batting first have lost 10 out of 17 T20 internationals there. And it's expected to be sunny and pleasant throughout the day, so it's going to be a good match. That's all in this edition of DD India News Hour. But let's know your thoughts of the news on the day. And you can connect with us on Facebook, X and Twitter, also Instagram. We'll be back with more news as it breaks here on DD India. My name is Mark Lynn. From all of us here in Delhi, thanks for watching DD India News Hour.